Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. Stress and anxiety are two things that most of us face every single day. And while they feel overwhelming at times, we must ask ourselves, how can we prepare ourselves and balance things out? We're going to be exploring these questions and more today. My guest is Dr. Linda Potts, a healthcare professional who, having gone through extreme stress herself, she's since recovered, blending Western and Eastern medicine to help her clients balance all aspects of life. Dr. Linda Potts, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you very much, Madeline. I appreciate you having me here.
Oh, it's a joy to have you here. I've had several experts on the show who've talked about stress. It's a kind of common problem. A lot of people want more information about it. But what drew me to bring you on was that you talk about anxiety. Now, as I've looked at my own work, I've got a heavy schedule with lots and lots of activities that have to be done in short order and on time. You don't produce your show unless you are able to do that. And there's no question in my mind that I live with stress. But I don't really feel anxious about what I have to do because it's all planned. I want to know if I'm deluding myself, that my plans give me a sense of control, and therefore I don't need to be anxious about them, regardless of the fact that I do feel a certain level of stress. Would you talk about the distinction between this, if there is one?
I believe that there is for sure. And I do not feel like you're delusional at all as far as that. I think planning is really helpful and beneficial because when you have a plan, you can go step by step. So everything doesn't feel so overwhelming when you're like, you look at everything, oh my gosh, I got all this stuff to do. How am I going to get it all done? Whereas you plan it, you get into a rhythm to accomplish those things and you get to check off those items. And I think it's a great way to do things. You talked a little bit about my being ill, and I don't know how much of that you want me to share or anything, but
It's up to you.
when I was really sick, I became bedridden. And I was always a doer and I got things done and I would make lists. I still make lists. But when I became bedridden, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't speak. People couldn't understand me. I couldn't get out of bed to keep my house clean and orderly and all that kind of stuff. And it was really distressing for me. And it caused me not just stress, but it caused me to be anxious because things weren't getting done and I'm used to getting things done. And laying in bed, what can I do? How do I manage this? Because things were just falling apart. I was a single mom at the time and I had 2 young kids and I didn't have any help. And things were just really distressing. I remember one day I crawled out of bed, literally crawled down the hallway on my hands and knees. And I was looking through my house and I just sat in the hallway and I just cried and cried. I was like, oh, my house is a mess. I can't believe this. It was terrible. My kids came home from school and I was really embarrassed because I was sitting here in the hallway crying. But I just felt so overwhelmed that nothing was getting done and I couldn't do anything. Somebody shared with me a little plan. Have you ever heard of the placemat?
Yes.
Okay.
Talk about it a little, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I thought it was so great. Now, I'm a Christian, so when I use this placemat, so you take the placemat, and I don't know how many of you are listening that are in our age group, but we used to go to little diners or whatever. You have the placemats. I think you go to IHOP and you can still have the placemats. But when back then, you could flip it over and it was a blank page. So this lady came in and she was talking to her friend and she said, let's use the placemat method. So she turned over the placemat and she drew a line down the middle of it. And on one side, she said she put me, and on the other side, she put God. And for me, I put God. If you want to use universe or whatever, that's up to you. But for me, it was God. So I would write down the things that only I could do. And that's the key. And then I listed the rest on the other side. I ended up doing this on a steno pad And I was like, on that second, on the right side, it was like 3 pages long. Other side, there really wasn't much I could do. But each day I would write down the things that only I could do. And there wasn't much. Sometimes it was just only one or two things that I could do as I started to heal a little bit. And the thing that was so cool to me is the things that I wrote on the right side of the page, sometimes they would get done and I had nothing to do with it. Like my kids would come and say, Mom, how can I help you? And I'm like, look at this list. And if there's anything on that list that you think you can do, please do it. And things just started getting checked off. Then there were days that I felt better than others. And so I could go onto that other side and take care of them. That just relaxed my mind so much that I didn't feel so much angst and anxiety about, oh my gosh, nothing's getting done. I felt like I was actually accomplishing something, even though I wasn't the one doing all the things that needed to be taken care of. Does that make sense?
Oh, this makes so much sense. One of the pieces of advice that I always give my clients is after you make that list, pick just 3 things that are the most important. And you don't forget about all the rest that's on the list and just do those 3. And it's amazing how it totally relaxes you. You say, well, I have 3 things to do. Now they may take 2 hours for one, 6 hours for another. It doesn't matter. You only have 3 things that you have to tackle. And now I can see from what you're saying, wow, that not only helps you with your resilience and your confidence, but it also relaxes you.
Yep, very much. It's a great tool to use. It really is.
I was curious. I guess it's because of that experience that you decided to do what it is that you do today. Can you talk just a little bit more about that path?
Yes, absolutely. I was always healthy. I was raised in a really healthy environment. We ate healthy foods. Back then, they didn't have all these chemicals and stuff and processed foods and stuff, packaged goods. So my grandfather had a garden and we got food there. My grandmother put up food, so we got that throughout the winter months and stuff. And I just never got sick. I also was extremely athletic, involved in all kinds of sports all through school, even college. I was a swimmer during college. And then later on, I became a bodybuilder. So I was started halfway there. And anyway, with doing all of that, I just didn't get sick, which was wonderful. And Super Bowl Sunday, 1998, I was 41 years old, almost 42 years old. And I fell down to the floor and I couldn't get up. I had severe right-sided pain. I told my husband if I didn't know any better, I would think I was having a gallbladder attack, but I didn't eat fried fatty foods typically. That day, believe it or not, I was doing buffalo wings. But typically I hadn't had any yet, but I couldn't get up. And my husband said, do you want me to take you to the ER? And if anybody knows any of my background, I was an ER trauma nurse for a really long time. And I said, no, I'm a trauma nurse. I know how this ER works. If I were to go there, I'd have to wait because I'm not a trauma. And I would rather just wait till I go to work the next morning. So I went to work the next morning and I don't even recall getting there. I was in so much pain. But anyway, I knew the docs there and the ER doc looked me over and then he sent me to x-ray and I knew the radiologist there and I was sitting in a wheelchair and she came out and she said 2 things. 1, I have no idea how you're just sitting in the chair. Number 2, every organ in your body is totally inflamed and we have absolutely no idea why.
Wow.
That was the beginning of my journey. I was in and out of consciousness for 3 weeks. Again, nobody could tell me why. And make a long story short, it took 4 years for me to get diagnosed. I went to every specialist that I could go to. I was also pretty good friends with a neurologist that I went to. And he said, Linda, if you came in to me with a broken arm, I could fix you, but I have no idea what's going on with you. That's the neurologist. And this is because I couldn't think, I couldn't speak, I couldn't communicate very well with people. Fortunately, my husband is very intuitive. So he was the only person I could communicate with, and he would have to speak for me because I couldn't do. And then I became totally bedridden. And my primary care doc, who I just loved, he was an excellent doctor. He said, Linda, you may have to live like this the rest of your life because I've done everything I know to do and I've sent you everywhere I know to send you. And I don't know how to help you anymore. And I said, my head was down on his desk because I was too exhausted to sit up. And I said, not an option. So I told him I'm going to look into alternative stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And my husband had been talking to me about acupuncture. So I told my doc I'm going to go there first. I got home and within 20 minutes, I heard an advertisement for a free session to learn about acupuncture in Frederick, which is just a half an hour away from my home. God sent, my opinion. Anyway, that started my journey learning about natural health. And I started studying more and investigating more things. So that's what got me into doing natural health. And I got my life back.
Wow.
Basically, that's it. And been loving doing this for almost 20 years now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's the hard way to get there, but you got there.
Yes, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
Let's get back to that word anxious or anxiety, because I get the sense that it's not quite the same as stress. Talk about that issue.
Okay, so typically stress is something you talked about the holidays, and we get stressed because we got so many things to do. We got to get this done. We got to do that, or if you got to go visit family that you're not particularly getting along with well, or there seems to always be some kind of tension there. That's stress. Anxiety typically goes beyond that. It's more about fears and worries. It may be due to a specific thing, or it can be some unknown reason, and that's the tricky part. But it gets very intense, and you have a lot of physiological responses to it. You can sweat, your heart can start speeding up, you can feel your blood pressure going up high, you can get lightheaded. There's just so many additional physiological changes that can happen when you're having anxiety. And obviously, we don't want to get there, but when we start feeling that, we want to identify it. So I'd like to give you a couple examples of some of the patients that I've dealt with that have anxiety. It's literally anxiety, but there's different roots to why those anxieties happen. So one of the first ones that I experienced when I first started doing this is a lady came in, and she was like in her 40s, and she said, I'm so anxious all the time. And I have never been an anxious person. And I'm even going into panic attacks. And she's, I just don't have any idea what's going on. I've been to all the doctors, they've run all the tests, and they have no idea what's going on with me. And she's panicky as she's talking to me. And she's, this is just not me. I've just never been like this. I have no idea what's going on. I did my screening and asking questions and stuff. And one of the things that caught my attention, I asked her if she had any dental issues. And the reason why I asked that is because our teeth are connected to all the parts of our body. So if anything goes wrong with your teeth, you can have problems with a particular organs, glands, system, or vice versa. If you have any problems there, it can cause problems with your teeth. So she said, no, I don't have any problems. I'm like, okay. I gave her some supplements or suggested some supplements, and she went home, and then she came back a couple weeks later. And I said, so how are you doing? She says, my anxiety is better, but it's still not there. You don't understand. I've never had this in my life, and I don't know what's going on. I screened her again, and tooth came up again. And so I said, are you sure you haven't had any problems with your teeth? And she said, oh, a while ago I had a tooth pulled, but I don't have any problems with it now because the tooth got pulled. So I asked her specifically what tooth got pulled. And it's a tooth that is associated with adrenals. When your adrenals are out of balance or out of whack, what happens? You have adrenaline flowing through you, right? And when you have the adrenaline going, you feel anxious. Now, again, if you have a little bit, you get more focused and all that kind of stuff. That's like you get anxious doing a seminar or talking to a place that you're not really familiar with. But that's different than it being hyper. So I asked her, I said, so when did you have your tooth pulled? So she told me, and I said, when did the anxiety start? And she said, her eyes wide, and she goes, oh, like a couple weeks after I had that tooth pulled.
Wow.
So I referred her to a natural dentist because they do things different than the typical dentist. And she went to him, got the area fixed, and she called me. I was so grateful that she called me. She says, I just have to tell you, the anxiety, the panic attack's totally gone. I have none anymore. And it was just because she had a hole there. Our teeth help fill the circuit or complete the circuit of our whole body. And with that being open, the energy was just flying out of her. crazy. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it happened to her.
Oh,
So
that's
that's,
a remarkable story. I've never heard anything like that before.
yeah. And it was a great experience for me because I had never put those things together before
Mhm.
either. So that was really cool for me. But again, anxiety can be caused by different things. Another patient, another person that I know really well, still deals with, mm, actually hasn't had any panic issues for a while, quite some time, but was experiencing like flu symptoms, running high fever, nausea, all that kind of stuff. And it got so bad, his wife took him to the emergency room. Went to the emergency room, and they instantly gave him a medication that was supposed to be a sedative. And it did complete opposite. One of the side effects is causes anxiety.
Hmm.
And he was never an anxious person prior to that. But when he did, he said it was the most horrific thing. And for years, he was just traumatized by that. Different events would just trigger something. And he couldn't fly. He couldn't go to certain places because it would set a panic attack in him. He still deals with that. So he had PTSD from that response from a medication. And so now he carries just one little pill around with him. He hasn't used it in years, but that's just his little comfort thing. So he knows
Mhm.
that it's there, but he hasn't had any issues specifically with anxiety or panic attacks or anything like that since doing that. Again, there are different ways that people can experience anxiety. Another one I just had the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, she came in and she said she was dealing with high anxiety and just didn't want to go anywhere and it just was afraid to do anything. And she said what happened is her family they drove down to Florida and they ended up getting lost on this road and they got all twisted around. They were there for hours. And she said, as soon as she realized that they were lost, she started feeling anxious, you know, and then it turned into a panic attack and high anxiety. And so she was feeling really high anxiety. So that was something that triggered her. She hadn't had that experience before. This was relatively new for her. And so I suggested using some homeopathic remedies and flower essences because they help with mental, emotional, and also physiological things, just depending on what they are. And she was planning on traveling over the Thanksgiving holiday. Again, this was Wednesday. So I said, okay, so I want you to take these, I would like you to take these supplements if you agree to. And I'd like you to text me on Thanksgiving Day. I know it's a holiday, but I want to know how you're doing.
Yeah.
And then text me again on Friday and again on Saturday and let me know because I want to make sure that things are resolving. She texted me the next day and they were getting ready to go on a hunting camping trip, which she was so excited. She hadn't been doing that for 15 years. She hadn't been in the woods. And she said, I've been doing well. She used the drops some to help relieve some of the stress. And she just said she was just so happy to be able to get back into doing something that had so much fun doing before.
These three stories are quite remarkable. Oftentimes, when we see someone who is anxious or has a panic attack, one always thinks of psychological reasons. And yet, every one of those examples are ones that are coming out of very different
Yep.
context.
Yes.
Thank you for those examples.
You're
It
welcome.
really
And that's one of the things I want people to understand. You don't have to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist just because you're having a panic attack. Maybe, but that may not be exactly what you want or what you need.
Mhm.
And one of the things I was going to say is that when I address any kind of health issues with people, I try to go to the root cause. Like, when did it
Mm,
start? What things were happening in your life when the symptoms happened to come around? And where do you carry your stress? That's another question I ask pretty much
mm,
everybody. Where do you carry your stress? Because we all carry it in a different place. And with that, it can cause different symptoms,
mm,
right? If you carry it in your heart, which is where I do, because I'm a really heartfelt person, I can feel pressure or something there, angst there. But there are people that carry it in their stomach, so then they can have a lot of digestive issues and stuff, and they may not realize that their digestive issues are caused from the emotional stuff that they're dealing with, or the stress or the angst that they're dealing with. So anyway, learning, like, where do you hold your stress? Where do you carry it? It may be because you're feeling stressed about something, or it may be because the anxiety is starting to reveal itself, kind of thing. So knowing those kinds of things is important, because it's not always about, you got a mental issue and you need to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist about this.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It also says to me that recognizing that you're anxious is certainly an important step, because you obviously, that's the point at which you decide whether you're going to do something about it or not. Uh, but it says that you really have to think through what are the options. And you've already described three very different sources of anxiety. And as a person, I love I'm going to go back to your question. When did it start and what was happening around that time, so that you get, as you say, to the source of it? I often help ask people to take some time to observe themselves and to learn how to observe themselves and be conscious of what they're doing and what's happening around them. I do it for other purposes, but I can see there's this great benefit, which means if life feels different to you, you've got some tools that you can go back and look and see why, or
Yeah.
what, not necessarily why, but what affected that.
Yeah. I think it's really important to do that, and to pay more attention to really what's going on with your body. Because a lot of times people don't do anything until it's a drastic event has happened. The earlier that you catch things, the better and healthier you're going to be in the long run.
And we can't predict all the things, like somebody
No.
gives you a drug that you're going to have an unusual reaction to it. But let's talk about some things that we can do in our lives to alleviate those or reduce those possibilities as we go along, so that getting lost in the woods is not something that, for example, would throw you into a panic.
Like you started out, you say you plan things. That in itself is very helpful. I know some people say, I'm not a planner. I just do things at the whim or whatever. But again, if you tend to be a stressful type person, the more you plan, the better outcome you're going to have. It just makes sense. And even, okay, going for holiday season, you're going to go visit relatives. There's certain relatives that trigger you, then have very short conversations with them. You don't have to interact with everybody all the time. My husband taught me that. And that's huge. We're not responsible to entertain everybody. And again, if there's some people, mingle with the people that you get along well with, and that don't cause you stress, and or that actually make you feel calm and relaxed. And
You
the
know,
people that, I'm sorry, go
uh,
ahead.
what occurs to me is, let's say that you're in the work setting, and there is somebody that they make you anxious every time you go and talk to them for whatever reason. Maybe they're a bully, or maybe they're your boss, or maybe you just had a bad situation with them one time and you can't seem to get that out of your head. I love this idea of make the conversation short, because if you work with them on their team or in your work unit, you have to be able to communicate with them. But going back to plan what you want to say and go in and say it, and then and extract yourself to minimize that interaction time. I think that's a terrific strategy.
Yeah, another thing is we communicate so much by text anymore, that even when people are in the same building, if you don't want to have that personal interaction, text them.
Yeah.
You it you're less likely to have an attitude, or your tone of voice is not what it should be when you talk to them. If you text them, they can't hear what your voice sounds like, and you can't hear theirs necessarily
No.
either. So that will eliminate some of that stress that you feel about just interacting with that individual.
Mm.
I know my son has an issue with a particular person at work, and he was just made a project manager over a particular project. He works for Boeing, and but there's another guy that's above him that he has to report to, and for some reason or another, this guy just doesn't seem to like him at all. And my son says, I don't like working with him. Okay, then just minimize your interaction with him. Do as much as you can on your own. Text him, email him, whatever, because they do work from home. Some of them work from home at part times. And so that you don't have to interact and hear the tone of voice see a snotty face or whatever that happens to be. So just minimize it as much as you can. And again, with everybody having cell phones, you can text and email, and it's a normal thing now that you don't necessarily have to see a person face to face.
Mm. There's another thought that occurs to me. When I sense that someone, not necessarily upset with me, but just having a difficult time, if I'm in communication with them, especially if I'm texting, I'll throw in a little heart just because it helps them feel like somebody's on their side.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And I'll do a smiley face sometimes, even
Yeah,
if I don't feel necessarily that way. I don't want them to, yeah, that they can lighten up a little bit.
yeah.
That life, and that's the other thing is life, you don't have to take life so serious about everything. Again, that's a lesson that I've had to learn because I've always taken everything so serious and everything that everybody says. And it's just so much easier to just, and this is one of the exercises or the things that you can do is do deep breathe. Just deep breathe. And sometimes it's just breathe in and breathe out. That's all you have to do. But if it's a lasting angst or stressful situation, then just do that multiple times. And I think I listened to Dr. Hammer and he was saying, like, breathe in to the count of 3, breathe out, or hold it for the count of 3 and breathe out for 4. And sometimes people are like, I don't like to count. Okay, just breathe in and breathe out. For me, because when I was really sick, I had periods of anxiety, which I was new to me. I get stressed about things, but I not that anxiety where I just felt so tense and my heartbeat was just going crazy and all that kind of stuff. Because Lyme can cause that too. That's another thing. I was eventually diagnosed with Lyme disease,
Ah,
chronic fatigue, and fibromyalgia, and Lyme was like impacted my brain tremendously. And of course,
let's
you
just
got
remind the audience that Lyme disease is what you get from deer ticks.
actually, you can get them from many things. In Western medicine, that's the only thing that they agree with. And just to make it perfectly clear, I am not a medical doctor. I do not diagnose, do not treat, do not cure. But I know for me, I was very fortunate because my medical doctor, he said, your Lyme test is negative, but I believe you have Lyme.
Oh, thank
And
you.
yeah, which was great. He was an old timer. He didn't always trust all the tests and stuff, so that was a blessing for me. So yes, and there's different ways of transmissions. And mentioning that a flea or a tick can not just on deer, but they can get on a dog, or a flea can get something, and anything that transmits blood, and they can come in and attach to us, that kind of thing. So it's not just ticks, in my opinion, and from the studies that I have done. Again, I am not a medical doctor, so I don't diagnose people who have Lyme disease, but there are a lot of symptoms that are affiliated with that. Anyway, I got anxiety really bad, and also problems sleeping. I couldn't sleep because I couldn't shut my brain down. And
Mm.
again, people who are anxious, they have a hard time slowing their brain down. So I would do the breathing exercises, but I would breathe in and I just visualized, because I'm a very visual person, I would visualize the air going up and down, all the way down to my alveoli and exchanging gases and then coming out. So that takes a little bit of time to visualize
Ah,
that and then breathing back out. So I wasn't really concentrating so much on the breathing itself, but the process of the breathing, which took my mind off of what I was anxious about.
I love that strategy. It's to me, it's one that feels more comfortable for
Yeah.
me to do. I often will envision things, visualize things that my body is healing something.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah. So
and
visualization is very powerful. And if we can do that, plus it diverts your mind.
it diverts your mind. That's right. That's what I love about it, and
Yeah,
it diverts everything because you're really
exactly.
focusing on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is one exercise I strongly recommend for people. And the other thing is you can do it anywhere. You can be standing in a bank line, you can be standing
Mm.
in the grocery aisle or whatever, and you can do it. And it's not so obvious that people are like, because it's harder to do the meditative thing in the middle of a store when you're feeling anxious. But breathing you can do.
Yeah.
And again, take your mind off whatever it is that has triggered you at that particular point in time.
This conversation reminds me so much of the conversation that we had on this show with Dan Jones. Uh, he is a Tai Chi and Qigong master,
Awesome.
and he gave us an exercise for how to do that breathing, but also in a with a stance as well. And I
Mhm.
think to myself, I'm beginning to understand more what he was doing for us through that exercise now that I'm listening to you. Because all of those things that you're talking about don't just occur in the moment. The body learns to do that in its whole process. It becomes like a habit almost if you do it regularly, as Dan suggested.
Yeah, and that's great. And also, if you're doing a stance, it can also help ground you.
Mm,
And I know Dr. Hammer mentioned that too about grounding yourself. A lot of people don't understand that. But even just, and that was one of the things when I was really sick and I couldn't even really walk because my feet hurt so bad. My
mm,
husband would pick me up and take me outside. Okay, you need to spend 20, 30 minutes outside in the grass. So he would lay out a sheet and I would lay down on the grass in the sun and it would ground me. So any way that you can, and of course anything bare is better, but bare feet would be better. But even in the wintertime, when you go out in nature some way, and it doesn't have to be a whole lot, grounding yourself. I know some people come in here and work with them, and I'm an empath, and I don't know if you're aware what an empath is. An empath is somebody who can feel other people's
mm.
stuff, which was very problemsome when I was sick, which is part of the reason why I was sick because I didn't realize I was an empath and I was picking up on everybody else's stuff. But learning how to deal with that has been a great tool for me to understand other people. So sometimes it's like I can feel these people, they're just like bouncing off, they're sitting in my chair, but they're bouncing off the wall and their head is just, all over the place and they're stressing out like crazy. I'm like, okay, we need to get you grounded. So we work on getting grounded and it makes a difference. And they're like, oh, I feel so much better.
In acting, that's one of the things you do before you step out on stage.
Uh,
You oftentimes will take your shoes off and you will roll your feet on like tennis balls
yeah,
just to activate everything in your foot so that you are grounded. And that's literally the language that they use so that when
yeah.
you're on stage, you can perform so much more effectively. This is great.
Yeah. The other
Keep
thing
going.
when you roll your feet on the tennis ball, it's
Mhm,
also your bottom of your foot and your hand are representative of your whole body,
mhm,
according to Chinese medicine and reflexology. So when you rub that ball, it's activating everything in there. So then again, the more your body is working together, the healthier and the better you're going to be able to think. All of that good stuff. It's really good things to do. It's great.
mm. You know what? I think I'm going to do that as a morning activity during this holiday season.
I think that's a good idea. That's a good idea.
I
Yeah.
know that sounds a little crazy, but I think it will really help me because yes, I do a lot of planning, but then something happens and the plan goes out the window. Yeah.
And that's the other thing is think about how important is this really? If something goes awry or something didn't get done, and that was one of the things I had to learn when I was so sick. How important is it really? And I came down to is somebody going to die or is somebody going to get hurt if I don't do whatever it was?
Yeah.
Because I was so limited at the beginning of what I could do. And actually, my husband has to remind me occasionally, okay, Linda, is somebody going to get hurt if you don't get this done? Because I'm a doer and I do a lot of things, but then I can get overwhelmed because I've got so much to do. I've got so much to do. And again, a lot of times we put that pressure on ourselves and it doesn't need to be there.
Mhm.
Again, how important is it? And if you plan things out and there's 3 things for you to do, more than likely you're going to get those 3 things done without hesitation. But if you don't, and again, that's where you prioritize those 3 things. Which one is the most important? Which one is going to have the biggest impact?
Mhm.
Which one am I going to stress about less if I don't get it done? Right. So it's just managing your life and really understanding. And I don't know how you feel about this, Madeline, but I know the older I get, really, the less important I see a lot of things are.
Oh yeah.
There's just so many things that seem so dang important
Yeah.
growing up and being a
Yeah.
teenager and going to college and all that kind of stuff, but or even just raising our kids.
I think some of that comes from the fact that early in our life, we are figuring out who we are. Teenage years are really hard on them because they're suddenly realizing that they are an entity themselves. 2-year-olds go through the same thing, that they suddenly discover they're not their mother. But as a teenager, you suddenly discover, wow, I'm a whole entity. And figuring that out is very hard. But then you still aren't finished because you haven't necessarily, even though you've understood that you're separate, you may not have figured out who you really are. And it takes years to do that. I think that's part of the reason why you and I, in advanced, oh, no, we won't say advanced age, we'll just say, like more mature years,
Yeah. That's funny.
that we have done that kind of work. And so we know who this person is, and we don't have to worry about that part of things, just what gets done. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. And actually, when I first started bringing this back to the teenage thing that you brought up, I had a 15-year-old that called me and said, I'm interested in knowing what you're doing, what you do there at Healing Waters. Like I said, I had just started here. And she said, I want my grandfather. My grandfather needs a lot of help, which it's like a 15-year-old's calling to get help for the grandfather, which I thought was absolutely amazing. And so she was asking different things. And she goes, actually, I would like to come see you. I'm like, okay, would love to see you. So she came in and she just had a really heavy load. 15, she was sophomore at Smithsburg High School here, and she was active in all kinds of things and just doing so many things. But after I worked with her, it like changed her. She's, oh, I feel more grounded. I feel more confident in who I am and where I want to go. I see some of the things that I don't need to do now and the things that are really important to me. I want to put more emphasis on it. It was amazing. It was to see her transform in such a very short period of time, and happy,
Yeah.
like really happy, not feeling so weighted down by all the pressures of being a teenager and all the things that need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting.
I coach teenagers as well.
Huh?
And it's amazing. With just, you only have to give them small nudges,
Yeah.
and they have to trust you, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But give them small nudges, and oh, they can go amazing places. And you're right, they can figure that aspect of who they are faster, just simply with just that little nudge, with that confidence that you're sending them in the right direction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So a couple other things that people can do if they're starting to feel anxious or have periods of anxiety is bring your mind back to the present moment. What's happening right now? Focus only on the next 5 minutes or even the next minute. I know my husband and I went through a really challenging time, and just so overwhelming, very high stress. And like, what am I going to do? So I would come here to the office and I'd sit in front of my computer and I'm like, okay, what's the one thing I need to do next? Because there was just so many things going on. And then I would accomplish that. And it's like, okay, feel good about that. And some days I could come in and say, okay, so what's 2 things that I need to focus on right now? Like, what else do I need to take care of, so that I didn't feel so overwhelmed and build that stress level up high and higher, so that I became anxious about things. It made a world of difference for me. And we got through it, and we're the better for it and all of that. So again, bring it down to, okay, what is within my control right now? What am I responsible for right now? And focus only on those minutes. A lot of times your brain will go, yeah, but I remember I started doing that. Yeah, but I got to get that done. Oh, I got to get that. And it's like, oh, shut up, go back. And I'm like, okay, focus only on what needs to be done right now. And that's what we should do anyway.
Mhm.
Really focus on the present moment of what we're supposed to be taking care of right now, rather than thinking so many different things. We get sidetracked and distracted and all.
And I really want to go back also to the placemat
Mhm.
idea of listing the things that you have control over and listing the things that you don't think you have control over. Just identifying them, but not worrying about them, so that you focus here. And you're right, there is, I'll call it magic, that some of those things just happen because they need to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, what I did was, instead of what I have control over, I was always afraid because I had so much damage to my brain, literally damage to my brain. There's a lot of things that I can't recall. I don't remember because parts of my brain were damaged from the Lyme. But I was so worried that I would forget. what I needed to do or the things that needed to happen. So once I put it down on the page, I didn't have to worry about it
That's right.
because it was there. I could always go back to it, or somebody else could look at it and go back to it. And that in itself just helped me relax tremendously because I was so afraid I would forget really important things. There are a lot of important things, maybe not something that you have to do today, but something that needs to be done. And again, I was afraid it wouldn't get done if I didn't write it down somewhere. So that was just a tremendous tool for me for such a long period of time.
We've developed all kinds of strategies, everything from listing things to developing plans to having short conversations with people who irritate you, taking deep breaths, visualizing the process in your body, and bringing your mind back to keep bringing your mind back to the present. Grounding. I didn't put that one down. Grounding. Wow. What I like about that list is it gives me lots of options. I may not want to do a lot of deep breathing, but I like to do visualization. So I'll do visualization while you do breathing. And it just gives us options. I love options.
Yeah, another thing you can add to that is do a physical activity. Take a
Okay, yes,
walk, and some people don't want to do that either. They would rather sit and meditate, and that's fine. You do what
yes.
works for you. You can try different things and see which one works
Yeah,
the best for you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Absolutely great. We're almost out of time. And I want to make sure that people understand that you work on more than things, more than anxiety. You have a practice that's a fairly broad practice, as I recall.
Yes. And the typical patients that see me is, like I said, you go to your medical doctor, your Western medicine doc, and they work on the physical, right? But sometimes it doesn't get resolved, and that was like me. I was my perfect avatar, basically. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They knew that there was something wrong, but they tried everything that they knew how. So I look at a patient from a holistic perspective. So I look at the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual parts of people. Typically they have physical symptoms when they come in because it didn't get resolved, but because we have those four parts, if one of them is out of balance, it can kick any of the other ones out of balance. If you don't get resolution when you go to a Western medicine, because that's typically what we deal with is the physical, and most people don't want to talk about emotional and mental with Western medicine because then they'll send you to a psychiatrist or psychologist, and then you can get labeled and all that kind of stuff, and people don't like that. I'm talking about just our normal emotions and just the normal way that we think about things. So any of those can be kicked out of balance, and if they are, a lot of times it doesn't get our attention until we have physical symptoms. So if they don't get resolved, that's a lot of times people come to me as, I've been to everybody else and I don't know where else to go. Can you help me?
Mm.
Try to work with that. I work with all kinds of issues, but again, I look at all of those aspects. And when I talk about spiritual, I'm not talking about religion or I go to church every week and therefore whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the spiritual part of you, the soul, your soul.
Yep.
Now, I've worked with people all across the United States. I still do. In fact, I worked on somebody yesterday in California. I've never seen her. I would love to see her. I'd love to meet her in person. I actually had 7 or 8 patients in Montana since 2008. They've been patients of mine. 2 years ago, my husband and I drove out to Montana and I actually met them. It's the first time I'd ever seen them. We met at a restaurant and I said to my husband, I don't even know what they look like. How am I going to know who they are? Fortunately, they recognized me. But
Right.
anyway, it was wonderful. It was so great to meet them in person. But again, I work with people and I've actually worked with people in other countries as well.
How can
Some
people
periods
get
of
in
time.
touch with you?
They can get in touch with me. They can call my office at 301-824-4325, or they can go to my website at healingwaterswellnesscenter.com. I actually offer a 15-minute complimentary consultation if anybody is interested, to see if they're interested in working with me and see if we were a good fit, because it is a team effort. I want my patients to do their part as well. Or they can go to my website and they can fill out a form to request an appointment.
Fabulous. As I recall, you are currently sending out an email series called The Anxious Mind.
Yes.
How can they get access to that?
Probably the best way would be to send me your email at my email. So my email is healingwaters@myactv.net. And yeah, I'd be happy to send that series to you. It's really, it's helpful.
Great. Dr. Linda Potts, this has been an amazing conversation. I understand anxiety much better than when we started. It's more than being anxious.
Yeah.
There are some differences. And I have lots of strategies that I can choose from to help me, even if I think I'm getting anxious or
Yeah.
have anxiety. So
Good.
thank you so much for your time. Is there anything more that you want to make sure that you share with our audience?
I can't think of anything at the moment. I would love everybody to have a wonderful holiday season and to really focus on there's you don't need to stress about things. Relax more so that you really enjoy things that are happening during the season. And
Uh,
don't
I
over schedule yourself.
Yeah, I love that advice. Think
Thank
of
you.
remind yourself that you're supposed to enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Thank you,
Thank you.
Linda.
Thank you so much for having me, Madeline. I appreciate it. And I've really enjoyed this.
Great.
Thank you.
Oh my. I always love the conversations I have with people. They bring unexpected things, and I always learn, and I hope you do too. This is the time when we normally go into where I discuss a book. My new segment called Grounds for Thought. I have got not just one book today. I have 4 books, but by the same author and on the same topic. His name is Edward Tufte, and he's done a series on graphic design for conveying data and information clearly and correctly. So I just want to ask you if you've ever been concerned, like you're reading the newspaper and you see a graph, and what does this graph mean and why did they do it that way? Can you figure it out? If you feel concerned about that, you are not alone. And frankly, those whose job it is to present the data to the public in a way that the message can be grasped quickly and correctly, uh, know that doing that is very challenging and sometimes they miss the mark. If you've ever been confused, again, don't blame yourself. Look carefully at the graph or graphic or the table, whatever it is. And if you still can't figure it out, it may be it just wasn't done as well as it should have been. I find that more and more these days because I think that sometimes people are rushed. Well, Edward Tufte took this role very seriously. He was adamant that data and information be presented graphically so that the interpretation was accurate, not just attractive. This is one of his books. This is the first one that I read. The visual display of quantitative information. I'm going to show you the others later, but I did want to get at least one of those books out. But I'm going to show you one of the things that I learned as I began to read this book in particular, although the others have messages as well. In this book, he really talks about how you can use the visual aspect of the data to convey deeper concepts. And I'm going to show you an example. Now, I'm going to tell you in advance that this is not in focus because you don't need to read the language or the numbers, because I'm going to tell you what this is about. See that tan line, crooked line, looks like a branch coming out of a tree, going from left to right. It starts very broad and it ends up being much smaller, and then it turns black, and if you know what it is, it's coming back the other way and it gets smaller and smaller. That actually is a graph of Napoleon's army for his campaign into Russia in 1812. Napoleon started out with 423,000 men in his army. He went to Moscow. He started out in June, by the way. He gets to Moscow, wasn't successful, and begins to come back from Russia and slowly continues to lose people, men. And when he gets back home in December, he has only 10,000 soldiers left. He went from 423,000 to 10,000. That graphic is probably one of the classic graphics that comes out of, and it's actually not Tufte's design. It came from a man by the name of Minard, written closer to the time of this, but it's very graphic. You don't have to even read all the detail once you know what the topic is. And you notice that suddenly the visual is telling a deeper message than just the numbers would. All right, that's just one example. And he goes into his books, example after example. And as you read through these, you begin to realize, hey, there are different ways to present data. And now, mind you, you may not be interested in presenting data, but I bet you're interested in reading it and understanding it. So I don't care which side of the fence you're on. This gives you insight into what's really happening when you convert data to something graphical. There is one other piece that I learned from Tufte. He has lots to say about graphic design. But the other piece that I took from it was that he always felt that you should, as in his words, you should remove as much ink as possible. And what he meant was get anything that is not the data, about the data, get rid of it. It's one of the reasons I know you're going to laugh, but I don't like working with Excel because everything is in little boxes and all the boxes are delineated. Now, I know that those of you who use Excel all the time know how to format that gracefully, etc. I understand that. But to put the data in, you're constrained to these little boxes, and there's boxes everywhere. To me, that's extra ink, as Tufte would say. What I prefer is when I'm looking at a text, the text itself forms a square. And I know, okay, that's a box. I don't need a box around it to tell me that. So it was one of the major lessons that I learned early on. And I read these probably 30 years ago. But they have formed how I think about how I form data. This was the first book, Visual Display of Quantitative Information. The second one is called Envisioning Information. The third one is called Visual Explanations. And the fourth one that I have in my library, I don't have any more. If he's written more, I don't have it. This is called Beautiful Evidence. And he just keeps talking about how you can present data that may be very complex. And today we have very complex data to show how you can deal with that and turn it into the visual. That's my grounds for thought today. Letting data speak for itself accurately. Okay. Many people have asked me to work with them. It may be on a specific issue. Sometimes it's on a general goal. Whatever it is, it could be managerial, personal, career-oriented. If you're curious about how this can happen for you, send an email to Madeline@MadelineBlair.com and I will get back to you. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned something, but mostly I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And if you're on YouTube, please click the like button and by all means, subscribe. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.